All right, everyone, welcome back to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have Chief Davis from Hazel Crest PD. He has 35 years total in law enforcement, last 16 years as Chief of Police. Welcome to the show, Chief Davis. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I was going through your resume and I was like, whoa, this guy is an overachiever. There was so much on there. And I want you to be the star and the one to kind of go through your background. Obviously, you don't have to share everything, but give us a little insight into who you are.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me here, Paige. As you mentioned, I'm in my 35th year of law enforcement. I have a total of 16 years as police chief. This is my third department as a police chief. I've been here for 10 of those 16 years as chief. I've had a blessed career. Law enforcement wasn't on my radar back in 1991, but it ended up being where I'm a man of faith, and it's just where I believe God put me. So, I started out in law enforcement at a town called Park Forest. All my career has been in the south suburbs of Chicago. And after about 10 years, a friend of mine who I had gone to high school with got elected mayor in a town next door to where I grew up at. And the department was in shambles at the time. And the department that I worked for originally was a very well-respected department. My chief was very well respected. I had developed a pretty decent reputation in the area as an officer, and I met with my chief at the time. Met with friends and mentors in every aspect of the criminal justice system. And folks kind of, they gave me their blessing. They say, hey, if you're going to go over there and try to straighten things out, we will give you full support. Judges, state's attorneys, public defenders, they respected me as an individual, and I was able to get that support. And that was my first chief's job, and kind of went on from there. Right now, as I mentioned, I'm in my 16th year as a chief, and I continue to be blessed. I'm the only person of color to ever be elected president for the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police, which has been in existence for about 86 years now.
Wow.
I'm on the board of directors for the International Association of Chiefs of Police. I also sit as a chairperson on the International Chiefs Association's Juvenile Justice and Child Protection Committee. And right now, probably the most prominent thing right now is in July, I'll be sworn in as the 49th president of the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. Our organization has been in existence for 50 years, and this is our 50th anniversary this year. And it's just an honor for me to be sworn in as president during our conference.
I love it. Yeah, I was going through that. I was like, you have to be the one to share all of these things because they're really impressive. And I agree with you. I think that I've always had a belief that everything happens the way that it's supposed to, and that we learn lessons along the way that make us stronger and better. And so I love that you said that maybe it wasn't your initial plan, but here you are 35 years later, and you've accomplished so many great things, and everything happened the way that it was supposed to for you. Where were you able to find resilience and longevity in this career, especially during maybe some of the hard times? Because I find that, we see a lot of people who are at the peak of their career and they have all these accomplishments, but there was a journey to get there, to imagine that there were a lot of ups and downs along the way. So how were you able to, continue having that longevity and that resilience even in the hard times?
Well, my entire life, I've always been the glass half full guy.
Mm-hmm.
I'm the eternal optimist. I'm intentional in my optimism, and everything that happens to me, good, bad, or indifferent, I'm supposed to learn something from that. And once again, that's kind of where my faith comes in, is that, I believe that God places you in situations to learn something, even if they're not comfortable situations. And in those dark times or whatever times they might be, there's a saying I heard somebody say: when you're going through hell, don't stop, keep going, get through it. Mm-hmm. So I look to get to the other side to see what I'm supposed to. First of all, I want to always come out better, because if you don't come out better, then it was a wasted experience. And I try to share those experiences with others so that I can help somebody possibly avoid some of the potholes that I hit, or at least soften the blow if they have, or know how to deal with them. I just understand. Truly, I'm a student of leadership, and literally and figuratively. I'm in my PhD process for organizational leadership diploma, and my doctorate in organizational leadership. So I'm always striving to be a better person and a better leader. And I know that one of my mentors taught me that not everybody thinks like you. Not everybody acts like you. It doesn't mean that their intentions are bad, but you can't always expect you out of everybody else. And you've got to give grace for those people who are trying to do the right thing. So I try to keep that in mind and position myself so that others can maybe move forward in an easier manner as a result of my experiences.
I love that you talked about mindset, because I think mindset is so important, and it is, in my opinion, a trainable skill. And you're right, not everyone is going to be that way. And that's really hard. It's hard to, be, trying to do your best and pushing things forward and, seeing things from a certain lens and realizing that not everybody is you. And also accepting that there's maybe some beauty in that you can learn from other people too. Just because someone isn't like you doesn't mean that you don't have something to learn from them. And I think that we should find value in everybody. But for you to say I was intentional with my mindset, I believe, and I would love your opinion on this, that it's something that we can every day wake up and choose to do. We can choose to be grateful. We can choose to see things in a positive light. Not that that's easy all the time, because we know life is going to throw you curveballs and there's going to be, ups and downs always. But I think that we can choose to see the good in people and in our lives.
Absolutely. So I grew up listening to cassette tapes of motivational speakers, and Zig Ziglar was one of my heroes. Yeah. And I remember one time I heard him talk, and I used this. He says, "I decided a long time ago that today was going to be a great day."
I love it.
And that's how I look at every day. There might be moments in the day that are disruptive, but it's a choice to get totally knocked off your square. And so that's how I operate. And I just have to, once again, keep in mind that not everybody's cut like that. And even though, but there's a couple types of folks that are people they might not be made that way, but then there are people who, just like I'm intentional on trying to be positive, there are people who I believe are intentionally negative. I remember I had one of my employees, I would go into roll call and people talk about morale. And I go into roll call and I said, you know what? If you think this place is a great place to be, it's going to be a great place. If you think it's a horrible place to be, it's going to be a horrible place. And both, you're going to be right either way. But you're the one who determines what your perception is of what's going on. So if you choose to be there, that's a choice. And, this employee came to me and told me, they said, you really make some of us mad. I don't know, who's some of us? Well, first of all, when you say that it's a choice, because it is. Just like you complain all the time, that's something, not everybody does that. So I have to just kind of keep that in mind and be measured. And from a leadership standpoint, every organization is going to have some poison there. And, it's up to me to try to be that antivenom for those people who are subjected to that poison and don't really and shouldn't be receiving it. So, but that, once again, that's part of leadership.
Yeah, I think that the best we can do is try to lead by example, and also not allow that poison to seep into ourselves, because that can be hard sometimes, when you're surrounded by it. And I think that we have to have honest conversations with ourselves, because I would guarantee all of us have been the problem at one point or one situation in our lives, where we were the ones that were being negative, or we were the ones that were causing the problem in one way or another. And I have this conversation with my family actually a lot, because I feel like I'm always the one that's trying to see the good in things and see the positive, and my family's very much the opposite. And it's draining. It's really difficult, where I have to be like, hey, can we see it this way? Or, hey, like, can we change the subject, and just trying. And it can be really difficult to not let that weigh on you too. And so I think that all we can do is try to be, that beacon of light. And then also kind of try to be like the duck, where everything rolls off your back, which is also a learned skill. And I don't think that any of us are perfect in that respect either.
That's where self-care comes in. You got, and it's difficult sometimes for folks who I would love, I'm one of those that like for people to be happy, and being in leadership, I do what I can to try to make them happy. But when there are just some people who will not receive that. Mm-hmm. And from a wellness standpoint, for me, I have to be conscious of who those people are. And I'm not going to treat them bad, but they're not going to drain my energy in trying to get them to like me or like what I'm doing. And there's not going to be anything else that I could do. If I did everything they asked me to do, they would still find something else. And when you come across those people from a wellness standpoint, from a self-help and self-wellness standpoint, you got to learn how to be that duck and just say, you know what, I want to treat you respectfully, but I can't give you my energy because you're not going to suck my energy. I can give that energy to somebody else who it can build up rather than somebody who's just going to try to deflect it and try to drain even more from me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And I'm curious, obviously you've been in this career a long time and you said self-care. What were some of those things that helped you throughout your career to be able to take care of yourself? Because I think oftentimes leaders take care of themselves last because you're so focused on taking care of everybody else. Were there any resources or any things that helped you to be able to make sure that you're good so that you can be the best leader?
You know what? I always have to say most fundamentally, your peers. And when I say peers, I don't just mean police officers. I mean people who are at your level. I mean, not necessarily deputy chiefs, but until you are in a position where the final word comes down to you, you don't really know everything that comes along with it. You might be close, my deputy chief knows a lot, but they don't know how it is to have the final word come down to you. And so being in environments where you can talk to people who are your peers. So a couple of examples. Back in November, I attended a global executive leadership summit up in Canada. And it was given by the International Chiefs Association. It was the first one, and the Canadian Chiefs Association. And we spent 4 days up there. And it was about us as leaders, as executive level leaders, taking care of ourselves, and just being able, talk about and it was very well structured. And when you're in those environments, it gets to a point where, people are crying, it is, you're listening to other people's stories. Just last week for Noble, we were at a CEO symposium that we hosted in Detroit. And part of that session is a Chiefs only a closed door Chiefs only session. And inevitably, every time we had, it's the same type of thing. Somebody shares something that they're going through. Hey, my kid and I haven't spoken in 10 years. And we're in therapy now. We're developing a relationship. And then somebody else chimes in, hey, you see those common themes and some of the mistakes that we've made. And we realize that, we weren't the only ones, that our families, being a family member of somebody in law enforcement is not an easy thing. The scheduling, just what folks are faced with. They talk about the number of traumas that the average person is faced with versus what a law enforcement is faced with on a daily basis. You go from a call where a baby's passed away to going to find a lost dog, and you've got to, to the person that lost that dog, to them, that could be one of the worst days of their life. But and so you got to make sure that you're right when you go talk to them, just like you were dealing with the real traumatic situation. So having that emotional roller coaster, it weighs on the person. And quite often, we heard that I was listening in a wellness class at a conference of a friend of mine where she shared how her her dad was a police officer. She is a chief, and her dad was a police officer. And how you come home and you don't want to dump that stuff on your family. How's your day, dear? And you don't want to say, hey, I saw a dead baby today.
Yeah.
You don't want that dumped on your family, but your family members say, you know what? Well, you won't talk to us. You won't talk to us. You come home, you shut down, you don't want to talk to us. And it is perceived that way oftentimes. And we just internalize it. And we, things have absolutely changed from when I started, because it was used to be, you know what, suck it up. Come on now, suck it up. We got to go to the next call, or, this is just what comes with this job. And it can eat away at you. And so as leaders, that's one thing that I've learned, but I'm also always striving to get better at, is to try to make sure that that mentality does not get passed down and it's not acceptable within my organization.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think this conversation of executive wellness is actually something that is kind of new. I think maybe the last couple of years, I've been in this wellness space now for almost 9 years, and I hadn't heard the term executive wellness or executive peer support until maybe a few years ago. And it makes sense. I think it makes sense for a couple different reasons, but I think it makes sense because, as leaders, you're so focused on everybody else and taking care of everybody else that you take care of yourself last. And so it makes sense, to me, like logically, that, officer wellness would be kind of that first push, and then executive wellness would come after. But I almost feel like it has to be reverse engineered, in order for you guys to be good, to take care of your people in the way that you want to, in the way that they deserve. We would think executives, that wellness should come first so that can seep down into the organization. And I think that the more lived experience you have as a leader with these resources, being able to be vulnerable and have conversations with other people who are your peers, to be able to utilize some of these resources that are going to help you to be better, you can then offer that perspective to the organization as well. And so I know that there are a lot of states across the country that are trying to put together formal peer support teams for executives. And I know that there are a few who have been really successful at that. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that progresses and how those conversations and those resources progress over time.
Yeah, I think the professional organizations are kind of leading the charge in that. And we see value because, just like in Detroit last week, we all talk about how, these are phenomenal sessions, but what's going to get me through the year till we come back next year? I can't wait till next year to do this again. And so then you have some people that talk about, hey, I started seeing a therapist. I see a therapist on a regular basis, not just when something happens, but just somebody to talk to. And that's, you talked about earlier, you talked about leading from the front, being an example, leading by example. That's leading by example. It is not vilifying or anything like that people are going to get help. And also not, so it's not putting a person in position where they're jeopardizing their job, because there are folks out there that don't, you got to go talk to somebody. You shouldn't be carrying a gun, or you shouldn't be working as a law enforcement, instead of trying to say that, hey, this person is trying to make sure that they're okay to carry a gun and continue to do what they do, that, whether it be substance abuse or whatever, that there needs to be avenues whereby folks can get help, that are truly seeking help, not, hey, I get in trouble, and to stop from getting in more trouble, because there are people who abuse the system, that something will happen and then they cry, okay, well, I really need to go talk to somebody, or I need to go to this rehab, but they're doing it to get out of something. They're not truly trying to get better. And as a leader, sometimes it's hard to differentiate between those folks. And people may get away with some things because you cannot risk. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball to know if somebody's faking or not. So I have to err on the side of caution, and I'll do that all the time. And if it'll come back on them if it's something that they're doing for the wrong reasons. But I'm concerned about those folks who truly need it, and for it not to be a bad thing. There's here in the state of Illinois, a few years ago when I was president of Illinois Chiefs Association, there was a a hospital that partnered with law enforcement, whereby they set up a wing of their hospital that was totally separate, so that law enforcement officers who were having challenges with it, whether it be substance abuse and things to that effect, that they could go in on an anonymous basis. So they're not walking in the lobby of the hospital, or they're not, in an area where, everybody, oh, this is where the recovering folks are at, and they see you there and they know that you work for a certain police department. So that was a very good program. And it's a very good system whereby we're trying to be innovative and helping those who really need and are seeking out help.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I've actually never heard that before. A hospital setting aside a separate wing. I heard a quote that I loved, and I think it's really in line with what you said earlier. It said, "Education without action is just a meeting." And I was like, I really like that, because how many of us have been to conferences and we sit in there and we get all hyped up, and we have all this education and awareness and we're motivated and we're like, yeah. And then nothing happens. And then what does that turn into? It was just a meeting. We had a meeting about wellness or leadership or whatever it was. And it started and ended right there. And so I think that it's important for us to understand that we have to apply these things in order for them to actually help. And we have to take action. And it's not to say that you have to implement everything. I'm a firm believer in take the things you want, leave the things you don't type, mentality, and to do things that are sustainable. Because a lot of times we'll go to these conferences and there's 1,000 things that we can do, but that becomes overwhelming. So how can we find maybe a couple that really resonate? And then how can we put that into action? And so you said that before, I can't wait until the next conference or the next meeting to, have these conversations. So what are those things I can put into action now that are going to help me? And you gave some examples of some, things that other people had been doing, like therapy and things of that nature. But we have to take action, and nothing is accomplished without action. My question for you, and this kind of circles back to what we were saying earlier, do you think, because you said how everything kind of filters out and it impacts the family, do you think that that is an area that is maybe missing as a part of the conversation, or resources that are missing that, we could start maybe working towards having more resources for the families?
It absolutely is. And it's the reason I'm smiling is my wife and I just had this conversation a couple of nights ago, because like I said, I'm always trying to get better. And I had gone to a training, and I got the name of it, but it was a training whereby it was law enforcement. There were law enforcement people in the training. It was about officers dealing with work. And the presenter said that they had a version whereby they would often, in some departments, they would have, when new officers came on, they would have the entire family. Say you hired 30 officers or something like that, and they would have those officers and their families all come to a mandatory meeting, and they would talk to them about, hey, these are things you're going to have to deal with, and this is how you can cope with some of those things. And we just had that discussion. But my wife, as I mentioned it about the way it came up was, once again, I'm about to become the president. So I was talking to her about that closed door session. And I said, I think because oftentimes there are tracks for the spouses. When we go to these conferences, they have things for them to do. Most of them are social things, but I said, what I want to do during my presidency is, in the spouses track, I'd like to have a session for the spouses on wellness. Mm-hmm. So, and my wife says, why just the spouses? She says, you should have the officers in there with their spouses. And I said, so then we can, because I was kind of sharing with her some of the things that happened in that closed session. And she says, and then we can hear some of you all's things, and you all can hear some of ours, and we can help one another. And it would be about wellness, but it would be for the family, not just the individual. So I do believe that that's something that we really are not taking full advantage of. And I think that it would be very beneficial. And as I mentioned earlier, the young lady who's a chief now, whose dad, she does wellness. She's got her doctorate, and she teaches on wellness. And she shares the story about how she grew up and how her dad was an alcoholic, and that's how he dealt with the things that he had seen every day at work. And she shares how when she was a little kid and how that impacted her. And now she's a chief and how she's trying to help other people because of her experiences. So, that absolutely is something that can be expanded on. And I think it has to be. If you're talking about the full person, yes, as individuals, you might need some things, but collectively as a family to give you the tools to be able to deal with what we go through and what family goes through as well.
Yeah. Wow. I like that idea a lot. I'm interested to see once you implement that, how that goes. So you'll have to keep me updated, but I think that that's a great idea. And I'm a firm believer that stories save lives. Mm-hmm. I think the more we can share our experiences and our stories, the more people can understand that their experiences are okay and that they're not alone. And maybe you can't exactly relate to everybody, but we've all gone through really hard things, and I think that somewhere along the line, and I've done this, there's maybe shame or you don't want people to see the messy parts of you and you want to give this perception of perfection. And I think it's a disservice in a lot of ways. I think there's a time and a place for everything. But I think that we have to be willing to share some of those hard things so that we can help people get through their hard times in their life. And I've done a lot of therapy myself. I had a hard childhood and my parents were drug addicts and it was a difficult time for me. And I had a therapist who gave me an assignment. And it was a twofold assignment. And one was to go into an Al-Anon room, which an Al-Anon room, if you don't know, it's, people who were raised with addicts and, abuse. And so you go into this session where you can connect with people who have been through similar, maybe not the same, but similar experiences as yours. And the reason why I bring this up is because I think that this relates to kind of what you and your wife are talking about. I was around all the same people. And I did get value out of hearing other people's stories and, kind of connecting in that community based. But the second assignment was to go into an NA room and to only listen from the perspective of a child. And there was a man who stood up and he told his story. And it gave me such a different perspective because I almost saw him as like my dad in a way. His story was very similar, but he was talking about it like as like the grieving father of like, I did these things and I regret these things and these were really hard and I wish I wouldn't have done these things. And I was like, whoa, like I had such a different perspective of hearing this guy talk about his struggles as a dad with addiction. And I think that for me, that was the most valuable because I was able to understand a different perspective from someone who wasn't necessarily, that close to me. It wasn't someone who was my family member, it was someone else. So there's a little disconnect there, which I think was important. There's a little space for me to be like, wow, I get it. Like I can have a little bit more empathy. I can understand a little bit better. And I think by you guys combining, the employee and the spouse, and for different people to share their stories and different perspectives, I think both groups will start to understand what the other person is going through in a really powerful way. Because for me, I was like, not that, what my dad did was, excusable, but I was able to find a lot of forgiveness in that. And I was able to find a footing forward. So I think that's a really great idea. And I have experience with, something not the same, but similar to hear different perspectives that I thought was really powerful.
And it also gives you permission to kind of forgive yourself sometimes. Mm-hmm. There's things, I think in that room when we were there with the chiefs, I think probably when we were talking about our families, guilt was probably the prevailing. Man, I didn't do the job I was supposed to do. I was so busy trying to make a living and take care of my family that all these unintended consequences happened. And it's guilt. So, but then, you got people in there that are reassuring you that, hey, it's not, you did the best you thought, it's not your fault. And to have your peers, reassure you and things like that, it really does make a difference.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so happy that this is a part of the conversation now and that there is an emphasis on executive wellness and family wellness. So thank you for bringing that to the forefront. One of the things that you shared with me when we initially talked was the fact that you have lost people who are close to you by suicide, and now suicide prevention is something that is a focus of yours. And so, can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the things that you're doing to try to be proactive in the wellness space, and what do you think are maybe some of the key things that are still needed or missing to be able to identify early signs and be able to help people in the right way?
So I lost an officer some years ago to suicide during my when I had my first chief's job, and young man, quiet young man, unassuming, nice guy. And one day I get a call in the middle of the night, and I get a call from the Chicago Police Department. I live in the suburbs, and saying that, hey, we got your officer here, and one of your officers here. He's got himself and his family barricaded in the house. And so, I get there on scene. We spend most of the night trying to get him to come out. And at one point, he released his family, but he ended up taking his own life. And just in talking about it and debriefing afterwards with there were people in the department say he's just a real unassuming guy. That night before all this happened, he wasn't working, but he just popped in the station and he just sat in the roll call room, and everybody's like, hey man, like what's going on? And he's I'm okay. And nobody, not that it was nobody's fault, but there are signs that something's not right. And not that they could ever have any idea that something like that would transpire. But for me, it's about trying to know people, not just work with people, or but to know people, know well enough that when somebody is not what they normally are, to at least don't let it lie there at the surface. Make sure that we're trying to find out. But if you can't do that unless you got a relationship with somebody, it's harder to do it unless you have a relationship with someone. So that's why it's important to have relationship. And so those are the things for me, everything in life for me, ultimately comes down to relationships. Almost everything you do in life. And I'm very, 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 into making sure that I develop positive relationships with everybody I come in contact with that will allow that to happen. And so, with relationship, even when we don't agree on things, our relationship will allow for us to still continue to move forward. Because if we've got relationship, even if I'm doing something that you're like, what the heck is he doing? You know me, and you know my heart, and you know that my intentions are correct, that I would never do anything to intentionally harm you. And if I'm doing something, it's because I'm truly looking out for your best interest. And I know we can't have those relationships with everybody, but in the course of a workplace, everybody should have at least somebody. Mm. Or supervisor, and supervisors should have their finger on the pulse, no matter how well they know. They should have their finger on the pulse of those folks that they're in charge of, and they should promote others to kind of be our brother's keeper, and looking after one another. So when something isn't good, hey, you know what? Hey, come on in. We're gonna close the door. Hey, Mitch. I noticed, man, you went rogue. You normally, joking, and is everything okay? Is there something going on at home? Is there somebody, if it's not anything you want to talk to me about, is it possible I can maybe get some help for you? Is there somebody who you would like to talk to, or who you feel comfortable talking to? But just to not let it lie there, to try to do all that we can. And will it totally stop it? No, it won't, because, I've lost, ironic. I just had a young family member take his life a couple days ago. uh, um, and got a small child. And so I can't conceive what place, how to get in such a dark place that you think that the only option is to end your life. I just can't even fathom how that would feel. But it obviously is a very real thing, and pressures. I know sometimes pressures mount, but there are some people that you're like, no, not that person. I thought everything was going, but that whole saying about you think the grass is greener on my side, but you haven't seen my water bill.
Mm.
You don't know what it took for my grass to be so green. You don't know the sacrifices that I had to make. You don't know the choices I had to make. There's so many things. You just look at the end result or what's visible to you, but you don't know the price that I had to pay to do that. And we don't know, no matter how it looks on the surface with some people, what they've had to go through. I have one of my childhood friends who took his life. He was a wealthy man. He was a wealthy man, and circumstances changed, and he lost his wealth. And for him, he didn't tell his family. He was getting up, going to the house every day like he was going to work.
Mm.
Did that for a couple of years until it got to the point where everything was about to come out. And he just couldn't deal with that. So everybody who was around him, he had a private jet at one point. I mean, so you look at him from the outside and you have no idea the torture that he's going through. And it just, as a friend, it's like, wow, I wish I would have known. Maybe there was to tell him, hey, man, we're good no matter what you got.
Yeah.
But, it's so we have to find a way through relationship to do what we can to try to pick up on things when they aren't good. And even if we can't help, to at least be able to offer help so that we can at least try as best we can to help someone at their darkest moments.
Yeah, I was listening to, there's this young kid, and he wrote a book, and it's called Unpack Your Backpack or something like this. And he's a motivational speaker. He's super young. He's like in his 20s. So, he goes around and he talks about certain subjects. And one of the things he said that really stuck out to me is he was talking about how words matter. And I think it can go both ways, right? Like if you're positive or if you're negative. But he said, just because you can't see someone's backpack doesn't mean that they're not carrying one. And I really liked that because we don't know what people are going through, and we don't know what our words could do. Maybe us being really kind and checking in on them and asking them how they're doing, or sitting down and having a conversation with them, maybe that's all they needed to keep going. And the reverse is also true. I hear all the time with organizations, and we talk about culture a lot, and how peers can be mean to each other, and words can cut deeper than you think. And just because you can't see the backpack doesn't mean that they're not carrying it. And it doesn't mean that it's not heavy. And so how can we operate in that space where we understand that, like, we all have backpacks? We're all going through stuff, and how can we show up for each other in a way that's positive and kind and intentional? And when you talked about relationships, that's what they take. They take time, they take effort, they take intentionality. And it's something that we all have control over. We all can make the time to prioritize the relationships that we have in our lives. Do we always do that to the best of our ability? Probably not. I think we all have stories where we haven't done it to the best of our ability, and maybe we wish we would have. But can we make that effort starting now? Yes, we all have the ability to choose that. And so I know that you talked about, kind of having buddy systems or supervisors who really have their, finger on the pulse. And you talked to me about having a check-in system where you're always checking in, you're making that effort organizationally in a proactive way.
Yeah, and I'll talk about stories. Anybody who knows me knows I'm the story king. So, another friend of mine. And once again, we keep hearing the word intentional. We both are using that. A friend of mine who I worked with, it was in another environment. I was a law enforcement person working in another environment, and he was facing a lot of challenges at work. And he was under attack at this place of employment. And it was a high profile position that he had, and he was under attack. And I my intentionality with him is I would go to him on certain days. And once again, I'm a man of faith. He's a man of faith. I would go in his office and we shut the door. And when I see he's having a real bad day, I'd be in there praying with him. And I just, hey man, you know what, you're gonna get through this. And no matter how the outcome is, and I would do that with him all the time. And he did eventually get replaced. Like, it was a real high profile job. He ended up getting replaced in his job. And I was blessed to be able to actually help him redirect and go somewhere else to a similar job. But he came to me one day, and this was after the dust had settled. And he told me, he says, I just want you to know, had it not been for you talking to me the way you did, he says, I seriously thought about committing suicide. But the times that you would come in and you would sit with me, he says, that I want you to know that you really did save my life. Now, did I know that that's what I was doing at the time? Absolutely not. I call myself just being a good friend. And, somebody who obviously was under a lot of pressure, a lot of pressure. And I knew that. Instead of, I'm glad that's not me. It's messed up what he's going through. Instead of having that mentality, I was intentional about that. And like I said, I didn't know, I was just doing what was on my heart. Yeah. And for him to come and tell me that took a lot of courage for him to say that. But it's just been, and he and I, after that, we're friends now. We don't talk all the time, but people come into your life for a season and for a reason sometimes. And just because they're not always there to talk to you after that season doesn't mean that they're not there for you. But, that's why that was kind of affirmation for me that, that in doing the things that I do, that there will be things that'll happen in people's lives that I'll never know about. Yeah. That happens to people in law enforcement all the time. There's people you change the trajectory of their lives and you'll never even, in a good way, and you'll never even know about that. But that's why you do it. And every once in a while, those people reach out to you. I've had those 20 years later. Hey, one guy, young man, hey, he said, I went to prison after, he says, you were always good to me. He says he reached out. He saw me on Facebook and he reached out to me and he says, you were always good to me. When I was in prison, I started thinking about some of the things that you'd be trying to tell me. And when I got out of prison, I went to college. I got my degree. And now I'm a mentor for young people. And I'm teaching them some of the same things that you taught me. But that's only because you poured into me, even though I was out there doing things I shouldn't have been doing. So, those are the things that kind of keep you going. And, and that for me is self-help when the boomerang comes back and, you see some of the things that you were able to do.
100%. And I think that we all hope that we can have an impact on someone in a positive way at some point in our lives. But again, it goes back to what we said before. If you're not putting in the effort, you're never going to have the impact, and it has to be genuine, right? It has to be something that, comes from your heart, and you're not going around being like, I'm going to do this so that, they thank me later. Like, that's not the point. But I think how we show up matters so much. And I think a lot of times people are afraid. The conversations that I've had with, different people within organizations, it's like they're afraid to ask the questions. Maybe they're afraid to go in there and pray with someone. They're afraid to overstep. They don't want to be viewed as like overbearing or trying to get in their business. And I personally think, and I would assume that you agree, but tell me, either way, but, I would rather be that person that shows up and asks the questions and does the things, and have someone be like, hold on, than feel like I missed an opportunity when it was needed. And I think that we all want to make sure that, when something or if something like that happens, that's really tragic. Did we try? Did we try to have a positive impact? Did we ask those questions? Did we show up for each other? Did we look that person in the eye? Did we try? And I would rather try than regret not trying.
Absolutely. God forbid, like you said, I'd rather have somebody tell me, what, you're doing too much here. Mm-hmm. But at least they know. I would hope they know that I'm asking because I care, not because I'm trying to be nosy. But that's where a relationship comes into play. Yeah. And even if they're not ready at that point, they might be later on. You know what? Paige asked me about this before. I wasn't ready before, but I'm going to say, Paige, remember when you asked me before? I apologize that I didn't, I responded the way I did, but yeah, I really do need to talk to somebody about that. And I think that it kind of sets the stage and plants the seed that, and that could be a response that if somebody does say that to you, that, what, I'm not trying to be nosy. I'm just trying to help. If anything changes, just know that I'm here for you.
Yeah.
But that's intentional.
Yeah.
That's intentional, and that's got to come from the heart.
100%. Yeah, I love that. And I think you're right. It's sometimes no's are not no's forever. Sometimes it's just a not now. And I think that's with everything wellness related. I think sometimes there is a resistance to certain things. And I've had that before where I'm like, I'll never do that. Like, that is not for me. And then life changes, circumstances change, your outlook on things changes. Or maybe you have a partner that shakes you by your shoulders and is like, you got to change, you got to do something about this. And then your receptiveness to these things opens up a little bit. And so I think proactive efforts are always king. It's always number one, to be as proactive as you can. And even if you get a no, or you get pushback, or people maybe aren't receptive to certain things, it doesn't mean it's forever. And so I think it's an important reminder to keep putting in the effort on a consistent basis, because you want to be that soft landing. If and when someone does need something or they're ready, they know where to fall back. My final question for you, I feel like I could talk to you forever, and I want to hear all the stories, but for the younger men and women who are entering into this career today, what words of wisdom would you share with them that maybe you wish you would have known when you were first starting out, or something that's helped you along the way that you want to pass on to them?
Well, from an overall standpoint, that you're going to make mistakes, but you're going to be okay. Just make sure that you're a sponge for the right things, not for everything, but for the right things. And we know the difference between right and wrong, and we see people who are doing good and who are doing bad. Choose the people that are doing what you want to do, and mimic those people. And those people that are not, use them as an example of what not to do. But ultimately, you select your path. And once again, you're going to make mistakes, but they're not losses, they're lessons. And those lessons, you learn from those lessons. And it has to be intentional, that you're always trying to get better if you truly want to do so. And if you truly want to do so, people will recognize that in you. That's been a lot of my blessings. I've had people tell me that, I'm not just giving you opportunity because you're Mitch. I see something in you. People, I'm at the phase of my career now where I've worked hard for my reputation, for my name, professionally, personally, otherwise. I'm only going to allow access to my resources to folks that I believe that are going to do right by it. And you want to be that person, that you're doing it because it's the natural thing to do. And when it's the natural thing to do, people will see that in you, and they'll oftentimes tell you stuff that you don't even realize you got. They'll provide opportunities to you that you never thought you'd have. So you're going to be all right. You'll make mistakes, and make sure you try to get that work-life balance. Your family is important. They are part of this process. Don't leave them out. Find a way to have them constructively in what you do so that they don't feel left out.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you coming on here and talking to me for a little bit about leadership and wellness. So thank you.
Yes, ma'am.